Active avoidances are moving away. Passive avoidances are dissociative avoidances. So I go, so my body stays here, but my mind, my consciousness leaves. I'm not present. I'm not conscious. Phoenix, Australia, Melbourne-based people have PTSD guidelines. Okay, should be aware of those. Those guidelines are okay. They've been around and updated, and they keep redigging them. And they're starting to address complex PTSD in their guidelines because it's come out in the ICD-11. PTSD guidelines traditionally, however, have been a little bit towards the exposure therapy type way of working. And while that may be okay for single exposure, adult onset trauma, exposure therapy is not something you really want to throw yourself into with complex childhood or developmental traumas. So come on in space. So the flavour of the month is for everyone to go and learn EMDR. Okay? That's the flavour of the month. And a lot of my supervisees are often doing that. That's fine, no problem. Will I go and do that? No. Because my clients generally are complex trauma survivors. EMDR is okay for PTSD, not so much complex PTSD. And there's still not enough differentiation of those two in the community. So I'm very careful about exposures. Clients mostly, after a period of time of childhood trauma, it becomes implicit procedural to them. In other words, it's normalised, watching mum get beaten by dad. It becomes normal. So a child after a period doesn't even notice it's happening. Just for argument's sake. You know, there's differences, of course, and there's variations. But for argument's sake, the more something happens, the more you don't even notice it happens anymore. It's like, who's driven to work and figured out, how did I get here? That's your implicit procedural memory. You get to work okay, but you're not really conscious of what you're doing. You're thinking about something else. You're thinking about the weekend, which is fine. But you still get to work okay. So, we're looking at things encoded implicitly, and I'll talk to you a bit more about that shortly. Bessel van der Kolk is one of the gurus of the complex trauma field, and he's always been around. And he's going to give us this definition. The complex trauma stress field has adopted the term, the traumatic stress field has adopted the term complex trauma or complex developmental trauma to describe the experience of multiple, chronic, prolonged, developmentally adverse traumatic events. Most often interpersonal, sexual assault, physical abuse, violence, war zone, communities and other violence, and early life onset. So he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. A bit of a classic text in the trauma field. As we said, complex PTSD, not yet in the DSM, but it is in the ICD-11. Okay, that came in 2022. The DSM, I guess, is up for renewal within the next few years. It's usually every 15 years or so they bring out another version. So we hope to see some sort of complex PTSD being reflected in the DSM. The ACEs study. People familiar with Dr. Vince Felitti and Dr. Robert Under from America? These guys were doing some study in obesity, and they're wondering why some people were having trouble losing weight, and then if they did lose weight, they put it all back on and some more. And they were up and down, all over the place. So what was it that was maintaining this difficulty with weight loss and this difficulty regulating weight and staying at a healthy weight? And the more and more they looked into this, the more they found out that the people with the complex trauma histories were the ones that had the most problem with all of this weight gain, weight loss. And so they started studying what's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And this is back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and of course there's many, many papers, but this is their go-to model, this pyramid framework, where they look at the building blocks of people's lives and their personality and their well-being as their childhood, of course. But then they're looking at how much were you exposed to adverse childhood experiences, sexual abuse, physical abuse, witnessing violence, incarcerated parents, parents with drug and alcohol issues, domestic violence, abandonments, not having both biological parents, neglect. There's a couple of other, there's about 10 criteria that they are measuring. And they found that the more you have a score of ACEs, the more disrupted the neurodevelopment, which leads to social, emotional, cognitive impairment, adoption of health risk behaviours, which are having a drink, having a smoke, gambling like mad, cutting, burning, bruising, wanting to do damage to self or others, health risk behaviours.
Pornography.
Yes, sexual stuff, pornography. And then you get, in the orange, it says disease, disability and social problems, and the very top is early mortality. And Robert Under says that this is a circle actually. It looks like a pyramid, but people in their 20s and 30s and 40s who are having social and emotional cognitive impairments, adoption of health risk behaviours, and then disease, disability and other things, they're having children all at that same time. And so they're passing their stresses, their struggles, their difficulties onto the next generation. He recognises the intergenerational transmission. And both Dr. Vince Felitti and Dr. Robert Under say that this is the major thing that all health money should be put into, supporting mothers and babies, supporting mothers and children, supporting the healthy development of families, the mothers, fathers, children, or carers and children. It's our best, most efficient use of money is to raise healthy kids. Rather than to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, we're trying to prevent stuff by resourcing people as best we can. What does it all look like? Of course, complex trauma looks like this and other things. And I put the CEO in there deliberately because there's people at the big end of town very traumatized. Not just being disenfranchised, which is a stereotypical model, but you can be very numb and very disconnected and very poor in your relationships as the CEO. Okay, so it looks like a whole bunch of fragmentation, child abuse and the inner child, addiction issues, a lot of sex work, a lot of violence, so on and so on. Let's then turn to understanding childhood development. And of course, when we start to look at childhood development, we touch on attachment. We always touch on attachment. John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, beautiful people educating us about the importance of maintaining connection and developing secure bonds, secure attachments. And that secure attachment is not made because you're a perfect parent. It's not made that way. It's made through repair. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry I yelled at you. Silly me. Dad's tired. Dad's a bit overwhelmed. I'm sorry. Mum's a bit tired. Mum's sorry. So we make repair and then we strive not to make the same mistake again. So we put our hands up and say, look, my bad. Sorry, I was out of line. That's the way we build secure relationships. We own up to the limitations that we have and the mistakes that we make. So understanding secure attachment if we're lucky enough to have parents and a family that does own up to stuff and does make apologies, that does make amends, does make repair, and then strives not to repeat stuff as best as we can, because life is stressful for everybody, not just for complex trauma people, it's stressful for everybody. So if we are able to do that and make repair, we set kids up with the best gift they can have. A strong sense of self, good core beliefs. The world is mostly safe. I can mostly trust people. It's mostly good. I can be in the world. I can have myself. I can have my feelings. As a young woman, I can have my anger. I can say no to people. Step away. Don't touch me. As a young man, I can have my vulnerability. I can cry. I don't have to be macho. I can let down. I can be vulnerable. And it's okay. Secure developmental personality development. Okay. But of course we also know, Bowlby and Ainsworth told us very clearly, that there's not only the secure state that is part of the attachment repertoire. We also have the ambivalent and the avoidant states. And of course the type D attachments, the very traumatized attachment state. We have to keep all of that in mind with our work with our clients. Our clients are usually coming from an avoidant or an ambivalent or a very traumatized attachment pattern. And again, that's not conscious to them, that's what they're living out, it's implicit to them. We're not necessarily conscious of our attachment style unless we are open to feedback. So implicitly we struggle with these states. In treatment is all about the worker, the caseworker, the social worker, the counsellor, the therapist, offering predictability, offering consistency, offering compassion. So the worker is always trying to offer a secure opportunity, a secure relationship. And sorry, my bad, if you do something wrong with a client, with a person, owning up to it. Sorry. Sorry I said that. I can see it really affected you. So, good workers are trying to set up secure dynamics with their client, their clientele. But there's more than Bowlby and Ainsworth attachments. There's also this thing called attachment to the perpetrator, which is a real complex trauma attachment. And Dr. Jennifer Frayed, University of Oregon, guys. So look her up, University of Oregon. You get a lot of free articles. Dr. Jennifer Frayed. She was out here just prior to COVID, about 2018. Anyway, she wrote a book in about 1995, or thereabouts, called Betrayal Trauma. It's all about amnesia. Why do some people who are traumatized have some memory of what happened, while others have no memory whatsoever? Especially complex trauma survivors. Why don't they have good childhood memory? Why do they make up their childhood? Oh, you ask them, how was your childhood? It was fine. Oh, how's mum and dad? They were great. You know it's not true, but that's very common. Oh, it was all fine, they were great. And if you ask them to get a little bit more detail, they say, actually, I don't remember much. They're really heavily traumatized kids, people, they're not going to remember much. And so we had all of this problem in the 90s. What was the problem that we had in the 90s in the trauma field with memory?
Repressed memories.
Repressed memory, and that led into the false memory problem. And where people are amnesic, and the therapist tends to suggest, well, it may be trauma. And the problem with suggesting that is, well, are you making memories now? Are you helping this person confabulate things that aren't true? And there was a big hoo-ha in the 90s. If who was around back then, some of us were around back then, we can remember it. There was a big hoo-ha. And so we've got to be careful with contracts around getting memory. You say, oh, it's something I can't really offer to you. to retrieve memory. If you feel like some bad things happen, well, maybe that did happen, and you certainly got the symptoms of. So the symptoms certainly seem like the trauma symptoms. But I wasn't there, I don't know. I'm not going to say. So we try and not get into that, except to say your symptoms are in line with trauma symptoms, whatever it may be. Now, what is DARVO? D-A-R-V-O. South Park did an episode on this. DARVO is what Donald Trump and all the politicians do very, very well. Okay, what do those guys do? Well, they deny, they attack, they reverse, victim offender. So the whistleblower comes in, says, look, there's a problem. And Donald Trump and co says, what? There's no problem. There's denial. And then you're the problem. You're making something up that's not true. Then they attack the whistleblower, and that reverses victim offender. So now this person who was coming in as the victim, I'm a whistleblower because I'm a victim, is now being fitted up as an offender. You're causing a ruckus here. You're making bad news here. Deny, attack, reverse, victim offender. And institutions do this, the media does this, other systems do this. It's good to be aware of, good to know about.
Families do it too, don't they?
Family systems do this. Let's see what else for Jennifer Freya. Oh yes, it all fits into Patty Hearst. You guys may know of Patty Hearst, famous newspaper, a media mogul, heiress, kidnapped back in the 60s or 70s, whatever it was, or in the 50s, I'm not sure. And then started robbing banks with the kidnappers, okay, taking up their cause. And there she is, she's on the video camera with a gun. She's robbing a bank with the kidnappers that kidnapped her. And that's got to be known as Stockholm Syndrome. So betrayal trauma is very close to Stockholm Syndrome, where you attach to the perpetrator and take up the perpetrator's cause. You enable the perpetrator. It's a very rare person that can fight their kidnapper, because if you fight the kidnapper, you're potentially more at risk. You may be killed. But there's a lady who's a French journalist who was kidnapped by the guerrillas in Colombia, and she was held captive away from her children, I forget her name, for about 5 or 6 years. She was held captive. And she said she gave them hell every day. Now that's pretty rare. Most of us would quieten down and whatever you say, sir, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full, sir, to keep our head under the radar and maintain attachment, maintain our